The Dralethian war fleet hung in the void like a constellation of molten stars, their angular hulls pulsing with the deep, rhythmic thrum of industrial-grade plasma reactors. Commander Draltal stood on the command deck of the Ignis Dominus, his segmented armor plates shifting with the subtle tension coiling through his body. The viewport before him framed the human colony world below Terra Nova. They called it a soft blue-green sphere wreathed in fragile orbital defenses. It should have been an easy conquest. The Dralethian Empire had crushed 100 species before this one. Their doctrine was absolute, overwhelming force. Brutal efficiency, no quarter given. Their ships were forged in orbital foundries. Their weapons designed to burn through enemy hulls, like slag through weak alloy. They had expected the humans to break. They had not. Draltal's secondary eyelids flicked sideways in irritation as he reviewed the tactical feed. The human defense grid was a patchwork mess. Improvised satellite turrets, jury-rigged missile platforms, even repurposed mining drones fitted with crude explosives. It was embarrassing. And yet, Commander Vashdor, the fleet's chief scientist, rasped from his station. His voice carried the metallic resonance of a Dralethian deep in thought, vocal cords vibrating against the copper filaments embedded in his throat. The humans are retreating. Draltal's mandibles twitched. Retreating on the holodisplay, the human ships, small, blocky things, barely worthy of the term warships, were pulling back from their defensive positions. Not in panic, not in disarray, but in formation, tight, disciplined, withdrawing toward the planet's southern hemisphere. Analysis, Draltal demanded. Vashdor's claws danced across the console, pulling up thermal signatures, radiation trails, energy spikes. They are falling back to these coordinates. A cluster of mountainous terrain lit up on the planetary map. Initial scans indicate subterranean structures, possibly bunkers or traps. Draltal finished. The thought was absurd. The humans had no technology that could threaten a Dralethian battle group. Their weapons were primitive, kinetic slugs, fission warheads, crude lasers. And yet, why retreat so precisely? Dralethians did not retreat. They advanced, burned, conquered. Retreat was the act of prey. And yet the humans moved with purpose, as if this withdrawal were not a surrender, but the first move in some unfathomable game. Draltal's claws flexed. He had seen the records of human warfare. Their history was a litany of blood and ingenuity. They had fought wars in trenches, in jungles, in frozen wastelands. They had turned rubble into fortresses, turned starvation into endurance. And now they were retreating. Order the incendiary claw to pursue, Draltal commanded. Full bombardment on their fallback position. Burn them out. Vashdor hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, before relaying the order. The incendiary claw, a destroyer-class vessel, surged forward, its plasma lances charging with a deep furnace-like glow. The humans would die like all the others. They should have, but as the first barrage of molten fire rained down upon the mountains, the earth itself moved. The ground split open, not from the bombardment, but from something beneath, something waiting. And then the human counterattack began. The incendiary claw's bombardment should have turned the mountains to slag. Instead, the earth swallowed the fire. Draltal's command spire shuddered as the tactical display flickered, recalibrating in jagged, uncertain pulses. The molten fury of the plasma lances struck the human fallback point, only for the ground to shift, great armored plates sliding aside like the jaws of some buried leviathan. The firestorm plunged into darkness, absorbed by cavernous tunnels lined with heat. Resistant alloys, Vashdor's neural tendrils twitched in disbelief. They dug. Draltal's claws flexed, the segmented plates of his gauntlets grinding together. Of course they dug. Humans always dug. The tactical feed sharpened as secondary sensors locked onto movement. Not fleeing soldiers, but something far worse. The mountainside erupted in coordinated detonations, not outward, but inward, collapsing into a labyrinth of tunnels that had been there long before the Dralethians arrived. And from those tunnels, the humans emerged. Not in retreat. Major Teyla Foster exhaled slowly, the rebreather mask sealing tight against her face as the last of the plasma fire dissipated into the tunnel's heat sinks. Around her, the squad waited in perfect stillness, their armor coated in thermal, dampening gel, their weapons humming with suppressed charge. The Dralethians thought they were chasing prey. They were wrong. The mountain had been hollowed out months ago, not as a refuge, but as a trap. Every tunnel, every shaft, every false dead end had been mapped, reinforced, and rigged. The Dralethians had expected a fortress. Instead, they had walked into a warren of knives. "Move," Teyla ordered, her voice a whisper over the squad's neural link. They flowed forward like shadows, their movements synchronized, their boots silent against the alloy-plated floors. Above them, the incendiary claw hovered, its underbelly exposed, its plasma conduits still glowing from the wasted barrage. Captain John Coombs adjusted the grip on his rail rifle, the magnetic coils along its barrel cycling to full charge. "They're not even looking down." Teyla's lips curled. "They never do." Draltal's holographic display flared with sudden alerts, not from the incendiary claw, but from the perimeter scouts. "Commander," Vashdor hissed, his voice laced with something unfamiliar. Dread. "The human forces we thought were retreating." The feed updated. They weren't retreating, they were flanking. Small, agile strike teams had broken off under cover of the bombardment, slipping through blind spots in the Dralethian sensor net. Now, they were hitting supply lines, sabotage teams carving through auxiliary generators with terrifying efficiency. Draltal's mandibles tightened. This wasn't a battle. It was a dissection. And then the mountain fired back. From hidden silos along the ridges, railgun batteries erupted, their hypersonic rounds punching through the incendiary claws, ventral shields like paper. The destroyer listed, its plasma conduits rupturing in cascading failures, molten energy bleeding into the sky like a dying star. Vashdor's neural tendrils coiled in horror. They let us bombard them to mask the launch signatures. Draltal's claws dug into the command console. Humans didn't just endure fire, they used it. Teyla watched the incendiary claw burn, the light of its death throes reflecting in her visor. Around her, the squad moved with lethal precision, planting charges along the tunnel exits, ensuring no Dralethian reinforcements would reach the surface in time. John ejected a spent power cell, slotting in a fresh one. "They'll send more ships," Teyla nodded. "Let them." The mountain wasn't their fortress. It was their bait, and the Dralethians had just taken the first bite. The incendiary claw's wreckage burned in the sky, a molten scar across the heavens, its shattered hull bleeding rivers of superheated plasma into the atmosphere. The light painted the battlefield below in flickering orange, red casting long, jagged shadows from the wreckage of Dralethian drop pods and the corpses of their shock troops. Draltal watched from the bridge of the molten fist, his armored fingers tightening around the command rail. The metal groaned under the pressure, warping like flesh beneath a branding iron. His secondary eyes, thermal pits lining his jaw, pulsed with suppressed fury as he analyzed the disaster unfolding below. "They let us strike first. They wanted us to." The realization was a blade twisting in his gut. The humans hadn't just survived the orbital bombardment. They had engineered it. Their mountain stronghold, their so-called fortress, had been nothing but a decoy, a hollowed-out shell designed to draw fire while their real weapons lay hidden in the valleys beyond. Vashdor's neural tendrils flickered with distress as he processed the tactical feed. The railgun emplacements. They were never in the mountain. They were behind it. Draltal exhaled. His breath, a hiss of superheated steam. A feint. The humans had played them. And now the incendiary claw was a funeral pyre in orbit, its molten wreckage still glowing like a dying star below. Teyla Foster moved through the ruins of the battlefield, her boots crunching over blackened earth. The air stank of ionized metal and charred flesh, the aftermath of the Dralethian bombardment. Around her, human soldiers worked with methodical precision, salvaging weapons, rigging traps, dragging the dead into makeshift graves. John Coombs knelt beside a fallen Dralethian shock trooper, prying open its segmented chestplate with a vibroknife. The alien's internal organs pulsed with residual heat, its blood a sluggish, molten copper. "Their armor's good," he muttered, "but it's not invincible." Teyla didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the sky where the molten fist hung like a vengeful god, its engines a dull, angry glow against the bruised horizon. They had won this engagement, but the war was just beginning. Draltal turned from the viewport, his armored form casting a long, jagged shadow across the command deck. "Recall all remaining drop forces. We do not commit another soldier to that death trap." Vashdor hesitated. "The High Command will demand retaliation. Then they will learn the same lesson we have." Draltal's voice was a furnace rumble. "The humans do not fight like warriors. They fight like predators." The Dralethian Empire had waged war for millennia. They had crushed civilizations beneath their tread, reduced worlds to molten slag, and broken entire species under the weight of their industrial might. This was different. The humans didn't just endure. They lured, they baited, they turned their own suffering into a weapon. And now, Draltal understood the first rule of war against humanity. Never attack where they want you to, because that was never where the real danger lay. Section Fey. Silent protocol. The void between stars had never felt so heavy. Dralethian dreadnoughts hung in formation above the human colony world, their angular hulls glowing with the dull ember light of dormant plasma coils. The fleet was a constellation of industrial brutality. Dark metal segmented like insect carapaces, copper conduits pulsing with molten energy, weapon ports sealed behind reinforced blast shutters, a display of power meant to intimidate. It wasn't working. Draltal's claws flexed against the armrest of his command throne. The humans had not responded to their ultimatum. No surrender, no defiance, just silence. That silence was worse than any transmission. Vashdor's neural tendrils flickered uneasily as he studied the tactical hololith. Their orbital defenses remain offline. No energy spikes, no fleet movements. Draltal exhaled through his ventral vents, the sound like steam escaping a ruptured pipe. "They are waiting." "Or broken," Vashdor countered. Their last broadcast indicated catastrophic reactor failures, radiation leaks. They may already be dead. A lie. Draltal knew it in his marrow. The humans had faked distress signals before. They had lured Dralethian boarding parties into airlocks rigged with shaped charges, led armored columns into minefields disguised as refugee camps. Every act of apparent weakness was a trap in gestation. And now this. An entire colony gone mute. "Scan again," Draltal ordered. "Full spectrum. Look for." The hololith flickered. A single blip appeared at the edge of the system. Small, insignificant, a human vessel, drifting without power. Vashdor's ocular lenses dilated. A lifeboat. Draltal's spinal plates locked tight. No, the ship was a derelict, its hull pitted from centuries of micrometeorite impacts. Primitive fission drive, no shields, no weapons. A relic from humanity's early spacefaring era, and it was broadcasting, a repeating pulse. No encryption, just a simple audio loop. Draltal played it, a human voice, weathered by static but unmistakably calm. "This is Major Teyla Foster of the United Earth Vanguard. If you're hearing this, you've found the Calypso. We left her here for you." Vashdor's neural tendrils coiled in confusion. A message in a bottle. What strategic purpose could this serve? Draltal's claws sank into the armrest. The humans didn't do meaningless gestures. "Run a structural analysis on that ship," he growled. Now. The scanners revealed it seconds too late. Calypso wasn't just old. It was hollowed out, stripped of all non-essential mass, reinforced with durasteel crossbeams, packed with something the scanners couldn't identify, a dense, organic compound lining every interior surface, and at its core, a single warhead. Not nuclear, not plasma, something worse. Vashdor's voice cracked. It's Calypso detonated no fireball, no shockwave, just a ripple in reality itself, a distortion that slithered through the void faster than light, faster than thought. Then the Dralethian fleet systems screamed. Engines died. Weapons deactivated, shields collapsed. For 3 heartbeats, the most advanced warships in the galaxy were nothing but inert metal, and in that silence, the humans struck. From the colony's surface, where their failing reactors had been charging hidden mass drivers, 100 tungsten rods screamed upward. From the asteroid belt, where derelict mining rigs had been converting ore into missile platforms, a salvo of kinetic kill vehicles ignited their drives. From the blind spot behind the system's gas giant, where a human cruiser had lain dormant for weeks, a single railgun round accelerated too. Draltal had just enough time to realize the truth. The silence hadn't been surrender. It had been the hush before the ambush. Then the void burned. The Dralethian flagship Molten will shuddered as reality itself rebelled against its existence. Draltal's claws dug into the command throne's armrests, his copper-plated carapace vibrating with the aftershocks of the human weapon. It wasn't an EMP. Those were crude, predictable. This was something worse, a violation. His ship's systems hadn't been overloaded or jammed. They had simply stopped, as if the universe had forgotten how they functioned. The bridge lights flickered, the orange glow of the plasma conduits dimming to a sickly ember. The holographic displays, usually alive with tactical data, were now empty voids. Even the ever-present hum of the Will's fusion core had gone silent. Vashdor, his scientist, staggered forward, his ocular implants cycling through frantic diagnostics. This isn't possible," he hissed, his voice stripped of its usual arrogance. "Our shielding should have." A proximity alert screamed. The first tungsten rod struck the molten Will's starboard flank. Dralethian armor was forged in the heart of dying stars, layered with ablative plating meant to dissipate energy weapons. But kinetics were primitive, a relic of pre-spaceflight civilizations, or so they had thought. The rod punched through the hull like a bullet through wet paper, vaporizing entire decks in a microsecond. Secondary explosions rippled through the ship as conduits ruptured, spilling molten plasma into the corridors. The Will lurched, its artificial gravity failing for a terrifying moment before emergency systems clawed it back online. Draltal's mandibles clenched. He had faced the Kralik swarm. He had broken the crystalline fleets of the Zenthar Concord. But this was insanity. On the cracked main display, the rest of his fleet fared no better. The human mass drivers had been perfectly timed, their projectiles arriving in staggered waves. One Dralethian cruiser, the Ember Claw, took a direct hit to its primary reactor. The containment failed. For a single beautiful moment, the ship glowed like a newborn star, then vanished in a silent eruption of light. And then the railgun round arrived. It had been fired weeks ago. That was the part Draltal's mind refused to accept. The humans had calculated this. They had placed their cruiser in the shadow of the gas giant, let it drift, powered down until the perfect moment. And then the round, traveling at a fraction of light speed, struck the molten Will's command spire. The impact didn't just destroy, it erased. Draltal was thrown from his throne as the entire upper deck of the ship disintegrated. The air screamed out into the void, carrying with it half the bridge crew. He barely registered the pain of his carapace cracking against a bulkhead. All he could think was, how had they done this? How had humans, barely out of their cradle, weaponized time itself? Vashdor crawled toward him, his exoskeleton leaking coolant. They knew, he rasped. They knew our tactics, Our shield harmonics. Another impact. The will groaned, its structural integrity collapsing. Draltal forced himself upright. His ship was dying. His fleet was dying. And somewhere in the void, the humans were watching. He could almost feel their gaze, cold, patient. The realization struck him like a plasma lance. This wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration. The humans had lured them here. Let them think they were weak. Let them believe victory was inevitable. And then they had torn apart the laws of physics to prove a single terrifying truth. The galaxy had made a mistake. It had underestimated humanity. And now, the Dralethian Empire would burn for it. Section Fae. The Ulnak Gambit, the will of molten skies, was dying. Draltal could feel it in the shudder of the deck beneath his boots, in the way the orange, red glow of the plasma conduits flickered like a failing heartbeat. The air stank of scorched metal and ionized coolant, the scent of a warship bleeding out in the void. His claws dug into the command console, the dark metal groaning under the pressure across the bridge. Vastor was still muttering, his voice a broken thing. They knew. He kept repeating, as if the words alone could unravel the nightmare. They knew our shield harmonics, our firing patterns. Our Draltal silenced him with a look. The humans had not just predicted them, they had hunted them. The tactical display flickered, its holographic lines wavering like a mirage. What remained of the Dralethian fleet was scattered, some ships drifting lifelessly, others caught in the slow, inevitable death spiral of a crippled drive core. And at the center of it all, the human vessel, indomitable their systems had labeled it, hung in the void like a specter. It was not a ship, it was a statement. Draltal had seen war. He had commanded fleets that burned worlds, had shattered civilizations that dared defy the Empire. But this was something else. The humans had not just defeated them. They had unmade them. And the worst part, they had done it with math, not brute force, not overwhelming firepower, just calculations, precise surgical strikes that bypassed their defenses, that turned their own technology against them. It was elegant in a way that made his carapace crawl. A proximity alert blared. Draltal's head snapped up. The human ship was moving, not toward them, not in retreat. Its engines flared. Not the crude, brute force plasma drives of Dralethian design, but something smoother, something that bent space without tearing it. The vessel slid through the void like a predator circling wounded prey. Then, the comms crackled to life. Empire vessel will of molten skies, it said, calm, almost polite. This is Major Teyla Foster of the United Earth Defense Corps. You are outmatched. Your fleet is disabled. You have one chance to surrender. Draltal's mandibles twitched. The Dralethian Empire did not surrender. He reached for the comms, then froze, because the human wasn't finished. If you refuse, Foster continued, her voice still eerily composed, we will execute the Ulnak Gambit. Vastor's spines flattened. Ulnak Gambit, he whispered. Draltal had never heard the term, but the way the human said it, cold, deliberate, sent a primal dread coiling through his veins. The display flickered again. Then, new data scrolled across the screen. Draltal's breath caught. The humans hadn't just disabled his fleet. They had hijacked it. Every Dralethian ship still functional. Every weapon, every thruster, every system was no longer under Dralethian control. It was theirs. And the Ulnak Gambit, he realized with dawning horror, was not an attack. It was a countdown. A timer appeared on the display. The humans were giving him half a minute to decide the fate of his crew, to surrender, or to watch as his own ships turned their guns on each other. Draltal's claws trembled. For the first time in his life, the High Commander of the Dralethian Empire knew fear. And the humans, they waited. The silence was worse than the explosions. Draltal's command chamber, once a roaring forge of strategy and dominance, had become a tomb. The only sound was the rhythmic, mocking pulse of the human countdown. Fei, 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 each digit searing into his vision like molten slag. His warriors, their armored forms rigid, stared at their own displays, their orange, red optics flickering in disbelief. Their ships, their pride, now answered to another. And the humans, they did not gloat. They did not rage. They simply waited. Draltal's claws flexed, the segmented plates of his gauntlets grinding together. His mind raced through every tactical doctrine, every historical conquest, every axiom of Dralethian supremacy, and found nothing. No precedent, no countermeasure, no logic to this. Humans were supposed to break. They were supposed to crumble beneath overwhelming force, to bow before the inevitable. That was the way of the galaxy. That was the way of war. But these creatures, these Terrans, had rewritten the rules without permission. Vashdor, the scientist, stood frozen beside him, his data slate trembling in his grip. The copper filaments along his cranial ridges pulsed erratically, betraying his distress. "High Commander," he rasped, voice stripped of its usual arrogance. "Their systems, they don't just override ours. They speak to them like they understand our architecture better than we do." Draltal didn't answer. His gaze was locked on the holographic feed of the human commander, Major Teyla Foster. She stood on the bridge of her vessel, unarmored, her dark eyes steady. No triumph there, no cruelty, just patience, as if she already knew how this would end. A low, shuddering hum resonated through the deck as the Indomitable, the human flagship, adjusted its position. Its hull, a patchwork of scarred alloy and reinforced plating, bore the marks of 1,000 battles. Not the sleek, angular perfection of Dralethian engineering, but something alive, something that had been broken and remade, again and again, and still refused to die. A flicker of movement. One of the human soldiers, Captain John Coombs, stepped into view beside Foster. He was tall, his frame lean beneath his combat rigging, his face a map of old scars and older resolve. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His presence alone was a statement. "We are here. We are watching." Draltal's mandibles tightened. This wasn't just a surrender they demanded. It was recognition. Vashdor's voice was barely audible. "Their records. I've been studying their records. Did you know, High Commander, that their homeworld Terra was a death world before they even reached the stars? Predators that hunted them, storms that scoured their cities, plagues that culled billions." He exhaled, the sound ragged. "And yet, they thrived." Draltal's pulse thundered in his secondary arteries. That was the truth, wasn't it? The humans hadn't conquered their world through brute strength. They had endured. They had outlasted everything, famine, war, extinction, and emerged stronger for it. And now, they had done the same to him. The deck vibrated again as the human fleet. His fleet-powered weapons, not aimed at the humans, at each other. A single order, that was all it would take. One word, and his empire's might would turn inward, a self-inflicted slaughter, and the humans would watch, just as they had watched every other predator that had ever tried to break them. Draltal's claws curled into fists. He had no choice. But that was the most terrifying realization of all. The humans had known that too. With a hiss of pressurized hydraulics, Draltal activated the fleet-wide comm. "Stand down." The words tasted like ash. The countdown froze. A single transmission from the Indomitable. Major Foster inclined her head, not a bow. An acknowledgement, and in that moment, Draltal understood the true horror of humanity. They didn't just win wars, they changed them. The silence that followed Draltal's surrender was not the quiet of defeat, but the stillness of a predator recalculating. Across the bridge of the Ironclaw, his officers stood frozen, their copper-plated carapaces rigid with disbelief. The air smelled of scorched metal and ionized plasma, the remnants of a battle that had never been fought, because the humans had ensured it couldn't be. Draltal's claws flexed against the command console, the dark metal groaning under the pressure. His gaze remained locked on the holographic projection of the human flagship, the Indomitable, its angular silhouette dwarfing even the mightiest Dralethian dreadnought. It wasn't the ship size that unsettled him. It was the way it waited, like it had known this outcome before the first shot was ever fired. Behind him, Vashdor's voice crackled through the comm, the scientist's usual arrogance replaced by something far worse. Awe. High Commander, their fleet signatures, they're shifting. Draltal's spines flared. Explain. The hologram flickered, then reconfigured, displaying the human armada in real time, or at least, what should have been real time. Instead, the ships pulsed in and out of sensor range, their positions blurring like heat distortion over molten steel. One moment, the Indomitable hung, motionless. The next, its energy signature splintered into a dozen phantom echoes, each one radiating the same lethal payloads. It was impossible. Their drives aren't just masking their positions, Vashdor whispered. They're existing in multiple states at once. Quantum superposition applied to warships. A cold weight settled in Draltal's thorax. The humans hadn't just outmaneuvered them. They had rewritten the rules of engagement entirely. A single vessel could be in one place, or 10. A missile could strike, or never have been fired at all. Every tactical calculation the Dralethian fleet AI ran spat back probabilities, not certainties. The humans had turned the void itself into a weapon, a labyrinth of Scharfeidinger's paradox, where every possible outcome existed until observed. And they had let the Dralethians see it. That was the true mastery of their strategy. Not brute force, not overwhelming firepower, information warfare. The humans had shown their hand, not out of mercy, but because they knew the sight would unravel centuries of Dralethian doctrine in an instant. Draltal's mandibles tightened. He had commanded fleets across 100 battlefronts, crushed rebellions, glassed worlds. But this was something else. This was a species that had looked into the abyss of annihilation and smiled. On the view screen, Major Foster's face remained unreadable. No gloating, no triumph. Just the quiet certainty of a predator that had already won. And Draltal realized, with dawning horror, that this wasn't their final move. It was a demonstration. The humans had survived their own planet's crucible, not by being the strongest, but by being the most adaptable, the most unpredictable, the most willing to burn every rule, every limitation, if it meant survival. And now, they had forced the Dralethian Empire to face a simple, inescapable truth. You did not wage war against humanity. You negotiated with it, or you died. The Indomitable's engines flared, its quantum signatures collapsing back into a single, undeniable reality. A single transmission pinged across the comm. No words, just coordinates. A meeting place. Draltal exhaled, the scent of molten copper thick in the air. He had no choice. That was the point. The Dralethian command vessel, Molten, drifted toward the coordinates, its massive segmented hull groaning under the strain of emergency repairs. The scars of battle still pulsed with residual heat, orange, red energy flickering through fractured conduits like the dying embers of a forge. Draltal stood motionless on the command platform, his armored fingers flexing against the railing. The scent of scorched metal and ionized plasma clung to the air, thick enough to taste. His secondary heart thrummed in a slow, heavy rhythm. Not fear, not yet. But something far more dangerous. Recognition. The humans had not simply defeated them. They had unmade the Dralethian doctrine of war. Vashdor's voice crackled through the comm, his usual arrogance reduced to a hollow rasp. The quantum signatures, they weren't just decoys, they were possibilities. Draltal didn't answer. He didn't need to. The Indomitable had done the impossible. It had split itself across realities, not as illusions, but as versions. each one a fully functional warship, each one capable of annihilation. The Dralethian fleet had fired upon shadows, only to find every shadow could strike back. And then, with a single command, the humans had collapsed those possibilities back into one. A demonstration, the view screen flickered to life, revealing the human warship in full. It was not sleek, not elegant, nothing like the angular brutality of Dralethian design. Instead, it was a patchwork of reinforced plating, asymmetrical weapon clusters, and scars from battles fought long before this one. It was a ship that had survived. Major Foster's face appeared, her expression unreadable. No gloating, no pity, just the quiet, unnerving patience of a predator who had already won. Draltal's mandibles twitched. He had expected rage, perhaps. Triumph, the feverish bloodlust of a lesser species drunk on victory. This was worse. This was certainty. The human spoke, her voice calm. "You're here. That's a start." Draltal exhaled, the heat of his breath fogging the inside of his helmet. "You could have destroyed us." A pause. Then, no elaboration, no justification. Just the truth, laid bare. Vashdor's claws scraped against the console as he leaned forward, his voice a hiss. "Why didn't you?" Foster's gaze shifted slightly, as if noticing the scientist for the first time. "Because we don't fight to exterminate. We fight to end fights." The word settled like a blade between Draltal's ribs. The Dralethian Empire had waged war for millennia, crushing species beneath the weight of their forge-born might. They had measured strength in fleets, in firepower, in the ability to reduce worlds to molten slag. But the humans, they measured it in choices, and they had chosen mercy. Not out of weakness. Out of strategy. Draltal's secondary heart stuttered. This was not surrender. This was something far more dangerous. This was victory. The Indomitable's hangar bay opened. A single shuttle emerging, unguarded, unarmed. An invitation. Draltal turned to his crew, their postures rigid with disbelief. Then he removed his helmet. The air of the bridge was thick with the scent of burning metal and fear. He took a step forward, and for the first time in his life, the High Commander of the Dralethian Empire walked toward peace. Not because he had been defeated, but because he had finally understood. The shuttle bay of the Indomitable was a cathedral of scars. Draltal had seen war hulls before. Battle-worn dreadnoughts of the Kasari Dominion, the pitted armor of the Gulrak Voidborn, but nothing like this. The human vessel bore its damage like a living thing. Each gouge and carbon, scorched seam, a testament to battles fought, survived, and remembered. The air smelled of ozone and old blood, the metallic tang of recycled oxygen undercut by something organic, something alive. He had expected a trap, a final brutal lesson in human deception. Instead, he found only silence and a single woman. Major Teyla Foster stood at the center of the bay, her posture relaxed, her hands empty. She wore no armor, carried no weapon, just the black and gray fatigues of her people, the fabric worn thin at the elbows and knees. Her dark eyes tracked him as he stepped forward, the heavy thud of his armored boots echoing against the deck. Draltal had faced warlords, tyrants, beings who commanded fleets that blotted out stars. None had unnerved him like this, because she was smiling. Not in triumph, not in mockery, in recognition. Vashdor, ever the scientist, had already begun scanning the bay, his ocular implants flickering as they processed data. His voice was a whisper, barely audible over the hum of distant engines. "High Commander, their structural integrity fields, they're not just reinforcing the hull, they're weaving it, like flesh, like it heals," Draltal finished, because that was the truth of it. The Indomitable wasn't just a ship, it was a body, a living, breathing testament to human resilience. Every system, every conduit, every weapon, they weren't just tools, They were extensions, and that changed everything. The Dralethian Empire had waged war for 10,000 years. They had forged their might in the fires of conquest, their doctrine clear: break the enemy, and they will stay broken. But humans bent, and then they broke you back. Foster took a step forward, her boots silent against the deck. You came unarmed, she said. Draltal exhaled, the sound a hiss of venting steam from his armor's exhaust ports. You left your weapons sheathed. A tilt of her head. Samey thing. No, it wasn't. That was the realization that had been burning through Draltal's mind since the moment he stepped aboard. The humans hadn't spared his fleet out of mercy. They had done it because they could afford to, because their strength wasn't in destruction. It was in control, and that terrified him more than any weapon. Behind Foster, a shadow moved. Captain John Coombs leaned against a support strut, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He wasn't armored either, just a sidearm at his hip, its holster worn smooth from use. Draltal's neural interface flared with threat assessments, tactical projections, the ingrained instinct of a warrior who had spent centuries evaluating danger. And every single calculation came back the same. This man is lethal. Not because of the gun, because of the way he stood, the way his weight was balanced, ready to move, the way his eyes never stopped scanning. Not for weaknesses, but for options. Humans didn't fight fair. They fought smart. Foster gestured to a nearby table, its surface scarred by decades of use. Sit with me, Draltal hesitated. Then, with a grinding hiss of servos, he removed his gauntlets. The metal clattered against the table. A surrender. A beginning. Across from him, Foster poured 2 cups of something dark and steaming. The scent was bitter. Earthy. Coffee, she said. Helps with the thinking. Draltal stared at the liquid. His people drank molten alloys, fortified with rare minerals. This was organic, alive. He took a sip. You could have destroyed us, he said at last. Foster's smile didn't waver. Yes? Why didn't you? She leaned back, her fingers laced around the cup. Because winning isn't about killing. It's about making sure the fight doesn't happen again. Then slowly, Draltal reached into his armor's chest compartment. The device he placed on the table was small, unassuming. A data core etched with the sigil of the Dralethian High Command. Vashdor stiffened. High Commander. Our war archives, Draltal said, his voice rough. Every battle, every strategy, every species we've ever conquered. Foster didn't reach for it. And, Draltal's secondary heart pulsed, and I am asking you to teach us how to lose. Because that was the only rule humans had ever followed. The one the galaxy had never understood. Survival wasn't enough. You had to adapt. And as the Indomitable drifted through the void, its scars gleaming like old promises, the Dralethian Empire learned its final lesson. Mercy wasn't weakness. It was the sharpest weapon of all. The weight of the unbroken the data core sat between them, humming faintly, its sigil catching the dim light like a wound. Foster didn't touch it. Not yet. Across the table, Draltal's breathing was steady, but his claws had retracted just slightly into their sheaths. A biological tell, a concession. Vashdor looked as if he might combust. His plating rattled, the sound like a failing reactor. This is necessary. Draltal finished. Foster exhaled, long and slow. The Indomitable's hull groaned around them, the sound of a beast settling after a fight. She could feel the eyes of her crew through the ship's internal feeds, watching, waiting. They knew, they always did. She reached out. Her fingers closed around the core. The moment she did, the Dralethian's posture shifted, not in aggression, but in something far more dangerous. Relief. Foster almost smiled. The Dralethians had spent centuries perfecting the art of war. They had dissected every battle, every loss, every victory, and rebuilt themselves in its image. But they had never learned the one truth humanity had carved into its bones. You don't win by being unbreakable. You win by bending. She set the core down again. Well, need access to your shipyards, she said. Vashdor's mandibles twitched. For what? Foster tilted her head. To teach you how to lose. And there it was. The flicker in Draltal's eyes. The understanding. The fear. Because this wasn't surrender. It was evolution. Outside, the void stretched endless and cold. But here, in the belly of the indomitable, something new stirred. The Dralethians had come for a war. They would leave with something far worse.